Now my absolute pleasure to introduce Andrew Kimball, who is the President and CEO of the New York City Economic Development Corporation, who will give us a few remarks on the blueprint for New York City, an excellent segue from that last question. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Kimball. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here, and Jack, thanks for that thoughtful introduction. And thank you to the Federal Reserve Bank for having this event today, having these deep and important conversations about the future of New York. I feel like being at the Fed, it's only appropriate that I start with saying something positive about the federal government. And I know today's conference is about mostly looking forward and tackling some of the difficult questions that we all have been discussing today, but I want to start by reflecting on what we've come through and the role the federal government played in that, because I feel like we really haven't been talking about that much, and I think people are going to be looking back in 10, 20, 30 years on what happened the last couple of years. And as a lifetime New Yorker, somebody who experienced the pandemic from the private sector vantage point of view and is now on the public side trying to drive the recovery, I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to the federal government for stepping up with unprecedented small business programs like PPP. I personally saw them save scores of small businesses, and across the country, you're probably talking about hundreds of thousands of businesses. We saw them bail out state and local governments. We wouldn't even be able to have this conversation about recovery in the context that we are today if those trillions of dollars hadn't flowed. And thank you here at the Fed for keeping interest rates as low as you possibly could for as long as you possibly could. Also really important. I've been involved with economic development in New York City for a long time through the crises of 9/11, 2008 market collapse, Superstorm Sandy, and New York City's always bounced back and the federal government's always been there, but the way it did over the last 2 years was really unprecedented, and while this may be somewhat naive, I truly hope that when people look back, there will be a greater appreciation for the role government plays in this country. And I would like to be able to say the vast majority of Americans will appreciate that. And I know in the context of January 6th and everything else we've lived through, that's kind of hard to imagine, but it is so true. I'm honored to be back in the public sector for the first time in 10 years and supporting this city and representing Mayor Adams today. Eric Adams gets it. He gets it that the prerequisite to prosperity and our recovery is public safety. I joined the mayor and Police Commissioner Sewell this morning at a jam-packed annual meeting of the New York City Partnership, the first time this group of CEOs and corporate leaders had been together in the room for the first time in 2 years. It was electric, and the mayor and commissioner focused 100% on public safety, knowing that all that we want to talk about recovery and all the tools that we have to use for recovery really won't mean a lot unless people are comfortable getting back on the subways and feel safe on the streets of every community in the city. The mayor also gets it, though, and this goes to some of the previous conversation, that it's not just enough to bring the local economy roaring back, which I think it will. But that we must capitalize on a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reimagine the economy in New York City and build a stronger, more resilient, and equitable economy. He gets it the government cannot do it alone. It's got to lock arm in arm with the private sector and celebrate that partnership, not something we've done a lot in recent years, and celebrate the kinds of job growth that can be created on the private sector side when it works in partnership. And he gets it that we have to think how we prepare the next generation of New Yorkers for jobs in the industries of today and tomorrow through innovative approaches through K through 12 that might lead right to vocational jobs, some of the green jobs that we were just talking about in the previous panel, but that also link to key programs at colleges, particularly City University of New York, that can lead into the industries of today and tomorrow. We know we have a lot of work to do. In the months before the pandemic, New York City's overall economy was strong and growing. Unemployment was 3.7%, an all-time low. All that changed once COVID-19 hit, with cases spreading across the city starting in the March of 2020. 2 months later, the unemployment rate had ballooned to 21%, as thousands of businesses shuttered their doors, many of them for good. We also know that pre-COVID prosperity was not shared equally. Unemployment, for example, was over twice as high for black residents as white residents, and 1.5 times as high for our Latino residents. Now these gaps have only gotten worse, with unemployment among Black New Yorkers 15%, more than 3 times the national average. Between April 2020 and March 2021, about 66,500 businesses closed. That's 28% of New York City businesses. Over a third of these businesses, 26,300, closed permanently. And of those permanently closed, 89% were very small businesses with 10 employees or fewer, just the kinds of businesses that really were the anchor for the Brooklyn Navy Yard and Industry City, the past 2 jobs that I managed. As we all painfully know, the pandemic exacerbating the disparities caused by systemic inequities and injustices in our neighborhoods, in healthcare, and in our workplaces were only highlighted through that experience. Earlier this month, I was excited to stand with Mayor Adams and Deputy Mayor Torres Springer at the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center to announce Rebuild, Renew, Reinvent, a blueprint for New York City's recovery. The blueprint is bold, comprehensive. It's a 5-borough plan with over 70 initiatives aimed at accelerating the return to pre-pandemic employment while simultaneously laying the foundation for the city's future. So much of this work is EDC's bread and butter. From our work increasing opportunities for MWBE contractors, strengthening business districts across the 5 boroughs, leveraging capital access to BIPOC and women entrepreneurs, and growing key sectors such as life sciences and the green economy. Allow me to walk you through quickly the 5 pillars of the mayor's plan. First, in addition to the work about public safety I mentioned above, the city's restarting our economic engines and reactivating the public realm by cleaning up. A very simple concept, but we've got to do it in key business districts across the city and making investments in those districts, in tourism and cultural institutions, all critical parts of the city's economy. Pre-pandemic, our tourism economy accounted for $72 billion of economic impact. The plan includes a slew of marketing initiatives targeted globally and locally to spotlight our culture and communities and the opportunities to bring visitors and also businesses and conventions to New York City. And we're going to provide relief grants to artists and small cultural institutions and build a new 150,000 square foot, one-of-a-kind cultural district on Governor's Island. And we're going to facilitate a permanent but well-designed and planned program to support and expand outdoor dining, one of the great inventions from the COVID times. Second, the city is supporting small businesses, entrepreneurship, and a more equitable economy. We're going to overhaul how the city economy interacts with small businesses, cutting business opening times in half, waiving and reducing fines, and reforming licensing requirements. We're going to address access to capital constraints for businesses, including by creating over a $75 billion small business opportunity fund to offer loans both to early stage and long-standing businesses, including many BIPOC and immigrant entrepreneurs. And we're going to help small MWBEs increase their capacity to win large contracts. As a note here, EDC has a $9 billion 10-year capital plan. Last year, 45% of the dollar value of our contracts went to certified MWBEs. Third, the city is driving an inclusive sector growth and building future-focused economies in key industries like tech, life sciences, advanced manufacturing, film and television, the green economy, and offshore wind. In life sciences, something the city's been working on for 20 years and is finally starting to bear some significant fruit. EDC is leading the city's $1 billion 10-year commitment to this industry that will create 2,000 companies and 40,000 jobs while generating $82 billion in overall economic impact. In offshore wind, an entirely new industry that none of us really could have imagined 4 or 5 years ago, it is exploding in New York City, and there's only more good news coming. And EDC is leading the city's way with nearly $200 million commitment to offshore wind that will create at least 13,000 jobs and generate an expected $1.1 billion of annual economic activity and significantly reduce our carbon footprint. Earlier this month, we announced an agreement that will transform the city-owned South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, a site that's lain fallow for 40 years, into one of the largest offshore wind port facilities in the nation. And just today, we announced an RFP for the North Shore of Staten Island that could reactivate underutilized industrial sites targeting large-scale manufacturing and supply chain connected to the offshore wind industry. And in film and television, something key to the success at the Navy Yard and Industry City, I saw it up close and personal, the city will continue to invest in studio and soundstage facilities across the city with nearly 1 million square feet of production and related space being newly built or renovated at the Brooklyn Navy Yard and the Made in New York campus in Sunset Park at Bush Terminal. And fourth, the city is connecting New Yorkers to quality jobs and in-demand skills. You're going to hear from Abby Jo later, one of the key new members of our team in City Hall. But we're partnering with CUNY, the nation's largest urban public university, to create the most diverse workforce we can through investments in CUNY's direct interfaces with industry and its adult and continuing education programs. And we're expanding bridge training to support New Yorkers in gaining foundational digital literacy and language skills they require to start or restart their journey in the best possible way. And we're partnering with tech companies and healthcare companies to upskill New Yorkers, including through the innovators at New Lab and company ventures to help underrepresented founders and funders access the resources they need to succeed in New York City's tech ecosystem. And fifth, the city's planning and building for inclusive growth now and in the future. For example, and this sounds like a very basic idea, but not something that's been done a lot in the last 30 years, we're going to use city agency office relocations as anchors to grow jobs and commercial space in strategic locations in outer boroughs, building on the success of the first project with the Human Resources Administration at Broadway Junction in Brooklyn, one of the most interconnected transportation hubs. I know Tom knows it well, in Brooklyn, but that's been seen major growth in residential and the surrounding communities in recent years, but has no downtown commercial hub. And if we're going to build a truly equitable, more vibrant and sustainable cities, we need more of these hubs. So the agency becomes the anchor tenant in a new commercial building that generates additional 100,000 square feet for small businesses that will enliven that new district and hopefully lead to other growth. Similar projects are underway in Jamaica, Queens, and the South Bronx. And we'll be launching the SEED Fund, that's Strategic for Equity and Economic Development Fund, to invest city dollars in both near-term catalytic recovery projects and neighborhood-wide capital improvements via a new equitable capital investment framework. And at Hunts Point, one of the projects I'm most excited about in the Bronx, we've announced a $100 million investment in the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center and $40 million of investment in the Hunts Point Forward Plan, a community-focused plan just outside this industrial park where 25% of all the food that we eat comes through every day, but is frankly an environmental disaster with over 800 trucks idling all day on fossil fuel generators. We must change it, and we will. It's been talked about for 20 years. We're going to tackle it. So to conclude, and I'm very much a glass half full guy at this point, there's some strong signs that the recovery is taking hold. Commuters are back on trains. As of March 1st, the city set a new record for single-day ridership since the pandemic started with over 3 million strap hangers. Unemployment's down to 7%, but we got to keep driving it. Financial and tech sectors are thriving. Over 4 million square feet of new space leased by Facebook and Google in the last 2 years. Kind of mind-blowing. The tourism industry is rebounding. In 2022, we more than doubled the visitorship that we had in the last 2 years. And New York City private sector jobs have increased by 20% since April 2020. And just over the weekend, I went to a fantastic event with the mayor highlighting JetBlue, announcing 5,000 new jobs they're going to hire just in the next 3 months. I think that speaks to the fact that people are getting back on planes, whether it's for business or for tourism. But we can't do this alone. It's going to take all the people in this room. It's going to take people in government, community, and business coming together. I'm not sure where all the speakers and the panelists came out earlier today, but obviously I'm very bullish on New York City in the future, and so is the mayor, and I look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. We're going to do a bit of a pivot now. We've heard from business, policy, civic leaders, academics, and others. We're now going to turn to hear from community leaders to better understand how the pandemic and its recovery is affecting communities on the ground. To lead us in that section of the conference, I am going to turn over the mic to my colleague David Erickson, who heads up our Community Development and Economic Education function. He's also our Chief It's Community Affairs Officer. I'm sorry. It's been a long day, and I'm sure you're all eager for a change of scenery up here. So with that, I do want to thank all of you. I also just want to take this moment to thank all of our colleagues here who have made this event possible. The technology was flawless. A lot of planning went into this, so I just wanted to take that opportunity. And the sandwiches were delicious. So everybody involved, thank you, and thank you all. David.
Thanks, Jack. As Jack mentioned, I oversee our community development work here at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The Federal Reserve System added this function in the early 1980s, and really in response to sort of a need for our bank stakeholders who were kind of struggling to respond to the new requirements of the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977, the Anti-Redlining Act. And so it's an old function, it's been around for a while, and it's, one of the things that we know is that it's very hard to make an investment into a low-income community without a kind of an ecosystem of partners. And so there are, in that ecosystem, government at all levels. You've got community-based organizations, community development corporations, community development financial institutions. You've got philanthropy. And all of this whole ecosystem is an entity that we're doing our best to kind of promote and foster and come up with new ideas, new partnerships and new sources of capital to sort of help that sector grow. So I do just want to it's a significant investment each year. About $400 billion accounts towards CRA credit for our bank partners. And so just want you to know that that's a partner in the work that we're talking about in creating an equitable sort of recovery from the pandemic. Now, to pause for a second, for those of you who are sitting in the audience, you got a chance to walk into this building, and it's scary. This is a scary building. I'm not going to lie. It's like, it looks like a castle. There's literally a turret right here. So like and there are bars on the windows, and it's very sort of intimidating. But I want to make it clear, like, you should feel comfortable here because you own this building, and everybody in this building is trying to execute on a mission, which is to create an economy that works for all segments of society. And that's a tough job, and that's something that people here really care deeply about, but we can't get closer to that. We're not there yet, but we can't get closer to it unless we understand what the barriers are and the obstacles. That takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of debate, it takes coming together like this and learning from each other. So that's why a day like today is so important. So just wanted to thank all of you for making the time to join us in this process and to teach us and the things that you know. I am so excited about this next panel. This is like the best part of the day. So I hope you were like, if you hold on. It's these 6 social entrepreneurs are going to really sort of share with you a problem that they identified in ways and solutions they've come up with to sort of tackle those problems. It was organized by my colleague Dominic Ramos Ruiz, who sort of one-man army over here. I'm gonna hand the microphone over to him, but please join me in welcoming Dominic and his panel. Thank you.
All right. Am I on here or here? Okay. So today we've heard from some of the nation's most accomplished thinkers about our city's economic recovery. And now we have the opportunity to hear from some of the region's most innovative shapers, people who are out in the boroughs challenging status quos in their respective fields and helping us see that a brighter, more equitable future is not just possible, it's already here. It's here because these community leaders have been living, breathing, and sharing it with more New Yorkers each and every day. So in this session, we're going to hear from, as David mentioned, 6 social innovators who are addressing socioeconomic challenges in our city in real time. These leaders we've had the privilege of on our community development team really getting to know over the past year, and we're really excited to have them present today. So today we're going to hear from Stephen Ritz with the Green Bronx Machine. We're going to hear from Donnell Baird with BlocPower. We're going to hear from Abby Jo Siegel from Here to Here, who also was recently appointed by Mayor Adams to run the Talent and Workforce Development Agency within the mayor's office. So Big congratulations to Abby in the audience. And then we have Dr. Lorna Thorpe with NYU, and last but not least, Baba Halm with Enterprise Community Partners, the New York office of Enterprise Community Partners. So with that, we have our first speaker who is up, Stephen Ritz. Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Is it working? There's supposed to be some sound here, but I guess it's moving very slowly. So I'll skip right through that. Good afternoon, everybody. What is going on? So live from the Bronx, I am Steve Ritz, from the Bronx, home of the Cheese Hat. And a little bit about our community. We are 45 buildings in the middle of the South Bronx, geographically isolated, and it looks just like this, moving very slowly. No supermarkets, 18 blocks to the subway, the poorest congressional district in America, and one of the poorest performing school districts in all of New York City. And remarkably, what do I do? Well, my superpower is I grow food with children. A little bit about our program. I'm going to skip this video because it won't work, obviously, but in classrooms in a 110-year-old building, I grow food with kids in a community who have limited means and limited access to it. And this is supposed to move fast, but literally this is what we do each and every day with the children. I am not the salad guy. I am the whole school performance and social determinants of health guy. We grow it, we cook it, we eat it. That's the White House chef. We innovate around cooking and kitchen work. At the heart of our work is a curriculum. It is an entire whole school curriculum with 300 pages dedicated to science, math, social studies, language arts, computer science, art, cooking, it's going to get there, homework, it's aligned to projects, even standardized tests. And literally, it has transformed the lens of public education. It is aligned to Common Core, next generation science standards, P21, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, even International Baccalaureate. And along the way, we've targeted youth from 40% attendance to 93% attendance daily, with, in many cases, 100% graduation rates. We've moved standardized test scores from 45%, a 45% annual increase in test scores. And remarkably, a school that was once slated to close made the cover of Time for magazine for the children. A school independently rated has gone from being failing and slated to be closed to proficient and well-developed in 3 years. A remarkable turnaround, unprecedented before. But 165,000 pounds of vegetables later grown in the South Bronx. My favorite crop is organically grown citizens, graduates, members of the middle class, kids who are going to college. And literally, we've taken over empty buildings, abandoned space, talking about the new economy, empty big box realty, and using the skills that we've generated in the young kids who have graduated, we've gone on to create million-dollar businesses with the very technology and innovation that was born in the South Bronx. And to see this and to have state-of-the-art fresh food, gourmet food, using 95% less water, 95% electricity, in some cases net zero on water and electricity, reclaiming food, reclaiming the environment has absolutely been game-changing. And that's what we do, and that's 0 miles to plate. We've also built the first wheelchair-accessible commercial farm in New York City for kids where they learn to cook, grow, eat, and prepare their own food. And then we've taken it to a whole different level, even in Appalachia, where we learned that 65% of children who age out of foster care wind up homeless within 6 months and jobless. We decided that we were going to build right there in partnership with the first commercial greenhouse in America that is run and maintained by foster care kids. We got down there, we started drawing, we started getting kids involved, we cut it, we built it. It took us 2 years. We did it with some grant and seed funding. We literally opened it up, and this is what happened. We now had a ribbon cutting 2 years ago that the farm is now commercially viable. It's actually making money. These children are making living wage. I don't think this video will work, so I'm going to skip through that. And then we took it a step further because we realized that these children needed homes. So we decided to build each one a tiny home so they could wrap around their services when they get out. And for many, the first home that they call their own in their lives. And the work has absolutely been game-changing. I'm sorry it's not going as fast as I had hoped, but dreamers and believers and achievers, 2,200 living wage jobs later, we have gone from disruption to delivery with 100% teacher satisfaction. I then had a big idea to take this program, and this was pre-pandemic, and make it global. Why not? So we started translating our curriculum first into Arabic, because from the food desert to the Middle East desert, and literally converted everything to Arabic and started connecting kids around the world through the power of the nutty cheese hat, around food, connectivity, intercultural relationships. The biggest cabbage I've ever grown, strawberries grown in the Bronx, 4 stories up in public housing. We started building farms together. We started connecting kids around food, entrepreneurship, healthy activities, and literally the program took off. Meanwhile, closer to home, here in the Bronx, we took over abandoned streets and literally turned them into farms, community spaces, productive places, right here in the Bronx, 104, baby, and literally put kids who had never had access to fresh fruit and vegetables or animals outside to work, to learn, to create, and to do. And literally, it was something that absolutely brought unity to our community. I like to say it's a bed that we could all lay in. And then Corona happened. And literally, our community became one of New York City's hottest death spots. The buildings that I tried to show you in the video, literally, you are twice as likely to die where I lived than almost anywhere else in New York City. And literally, our community just became insane. The garbage was piling up, the parks closed, the streets were closed down, and there was no food. We heard the gentleman before talk about Hunts Point. We realized that food was coming into the city and was still being grown. It just had no place to be sold. So literally, we got on the phone and started redirecting that food right to our school, and literally turned the basement of our school into a supermarket. And literally, my wife and I and a team of volunteers turned our school into a supermarket to feed our community. We started delivering food daily through a network of people. We started putting bags of food outside so community members could come down and grab and go, and literally created a whole new recipe for success, putting pop-up farms and pop-up stands everywhere so people could come, grab and go, and get their food. And in the process, what did we do? We put unity back into our community because we are the ones that we are waiting for. Literally everywhere we were selling and giving and distributing food. We turned our schoolyard into a supermarket, and once a week had children come in to pick up all their work and all their groceries and sent them home. And I'm proud to say that we even had the first wheelchair delivery service in the middle of public housing for senior citizens who are able to come down and grab their food and get it and go. Hopefully, you'll get to see it. Literally, this was every week in the Bronx through the pandemic. Then, as winter turned into spring, we started growing seedlings. We didn't grow 10, we didn't grow 100, we grew 1,000 and 10,000, and we started partnering with Grow NYC and literally started putting farms everywhere we could in New York City, and literally got the kids who had been cooped up for months outside, out of their apartments, into the parks, into community places, and started building farms. We started with a couple of kids, then we got more kids, and literally started growing so much food and so much community, it was game-changing. Literally bringing people out and creating community affairs, community opportunities, I should say. And this is what we grew: children, food, people, opportunities. We even started looking at putting solar panels in our garden so that people could have access to the internet. We don't have Starbucks, not in my community. So we created our own where you could come and garden and have access to the internet. I'm so proud to say that Bronx Machine was named by the National Council for Science and Environment as building a nation of problem solvers. Literally, as summer became fall, we started looking to basements, indoor space, and literally created farms. I'm going to try and go through the video so you can see, but in 60 days, this is what it was doing in basements. Raining tomatoes in New York City. We thought school would open, but it didn't. So I turned my living room yet again into a classroom. I brought in my farm, I brought in my books and my puppets and started connecting with kids online, teaching hundreds and hundreds of lessons. But the one thing we did is we brought in a chef. And that chef specialized in teaching recipes for children who didn't have access to stoves or high complex foods. And literally, we started with a cooking show that went from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to thousands of people online literally checking in and learning how to cook. School didn't open, so we decided we were going to give kids in partnership with PBS an opportunity to get involved, and literally created characters and a TV show where children were able to call in, be involved, and literally create characters, get content. It was open sourced, it was online, it came with free resources, it came with everything that teachers needed and parents needed to literally make epic happen. We got sports teams involved, and this was all locally done. Remarkably, the show had 2 million views. And just when we thought we'd be going back to school and things would get better, welcome to New York and welcome to the USA. It got worse. George Floyd. So I'd like to say compassion is our new curriculum, and just at that moment is precisely when George Floyd happened. Just when we couldn't imagine anything pushing us further, this is what happened. And literally, we started rallying, making sure that kids knew that they were valued. And for us, fighting today for a better tomorrow is absolutely the thing to do, because to see what is right and not do it is absolutely a lack of courage. So we were proud to paint our streets Black Lives Matter, and for us, it's about fighting racism, environmental racism, economic racism, and really tackling the issues locally. And that's why we scream in the South Bronx, education, not asphyxiation. And even though schools were closed, I'm proud that Bronx Machine in our school was named as a global showcase of excellence by T4, the top 100 showcase schools in the world. Remarkably, to think that our students and I have come up with ways to grow food that are net positive on food and energy and have attracted the likes of President Clinton have absolutely been game-changing. It goes to show that the Bronx is poised, ready, willing, and able to exploit our talent and diversity. And this is what we do in the Bronx. We grow food. We grow it anywhere we can. This is not Photoshop. This is 24 days. And whether you like vegetables or not, I've never met a child who's allergic to money. So here, where they actually store it, here we tend to grow it. And this is 24 days growing food, commercial quality, high-grade quality, nutritionally dense. The only thing more beautiful than vegetables are my students. So I like to say that we're working harder, we're working smarter, not harder, and this is the kind of innovation that we can be so proud of in the South Bronx. I like to say the children and I are creating a whole new recipe for success and literally transforming everything. So we're ordinary people living extraordinary lives, and it's my job and our collective job to shelter children to a better, brighter future. And this is the work that we do. This is the excitement that we generate. And this is the work that we love to do all around the world. It's a growth mindset, I like to say, because doing your best in this moment puts you in the best place for the next moment. And I like to say, our rising tide lifts all boats. So I'll keep spreading the message. I just got home this morning from Dubai. My story is from impossible to I'm possible, and literally have gone from hope to the Pope. Many years ago, I was 330 pounds, a diabetic, similar to Mayor Adams' story, who I'm a big fan of and loves our classroom. And literally eating the food that I grow with kids, we went on to become a champion of change. And along the way, we brought our children to the White House, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And to have the president talk about the work that we do in the South Bronx and have us present at South by Southlawn and put our technology in the White House is what this work is all about. This is what opportunity really looks like for our children. So, where did it take me? It took me to the desert, and literally from the food desert to the Middle East. And I'm proud to say that we wound up taking that technology, and this is not a virtual image. This is the sustainable city, the first net positive food and energy city in the world where it's 2 degrees cooler than anywhere else. And we used the very same model that we used in the Bronx to open up a top 20 school globally, all around the world. So I'm proud of the work that we do. I'm proud of the work that we can do. And it goes to show you that with a little innovation, anything is absolutely possible. It's the industry's job to grow the perfect head of lettuce, and it's my job to grow the perfect heads for that lettuce. Consumers, innovators, children who want to gobble it up. And literally, we brought the Mideast, from the Mideast right here to downtown Brooklyn with someone who mentored me, the royal family, one of my graduates, who are proud to share this bounty, because that's what this work is about. Along the way, we've garnered the Industry Disruption Award in the middle of the South Bronx. I don't even know the formula for photosynthesis. So, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And that's why we're here, because you don't have to be great to start. You have to start in order to be great. And literally, I am the guy who fights. I fight for children who are born in places that most people would not want to be caught dead in. I fight for children who don't have a bedroom to call their own, have never seen a dentist, don't know what a doctor often looks like, and will never get dessert. And along the way, we get to do amazing things. We get to grow food, we get to grow community, we get to build, we get to learn, we get to share. And each and every day in my classroom, I get to plant seeds. I get to grow children. We get to grow opportunities and change outcomes for the rest of their lives, changing their palate. We get to plant a rainbow. We even get to harvest it every 30 days or sell it, which is totally cool. So, communities are not born, and that's what this is about. Communities are made, and I will teach them, because we can teach children to fly, but they will not fly our flight. We can teach them to dream, but they will not live our dream. We can teach them to live, but we will not live their lives. They will live theirs. But in every flight, in every dream, the print of what we do today here as a collective society will always remain. So for me, knowing is not enough. We've got to apply. And willing isn't enough. We've got to do. So I'll keep building a network of teachers and people, and I'll be plant-powered, because the beautiful thing about plants is they don't discriminate, and they keep working and never complaining. And I'll keep growing them in school along with my students, because we don't want to be seeking the light at the end of the tunnel. We want to be the light inside of our tunnel, and that's what we do at Community School 55. We are the light inside of our tunnel. This work happens each and every day. It is a beacon of hope each and every night, and this is not one day in the Bronx. This is every day. This is what community looks like when you come together to take care of each other. Most importantly, we're here under one critical mindset, and that includes how we walk with the wounded speaks far louder than how we sit with the great. And literally in 2021, Green Bronx Machine rescued 10,000 pounds of food. A volunteer organization delivered 100,000 pounds of food, helped feed 2,300 people daily, grew 5,000 pounds of food with kids, brought schools on socially distant field trips, held online cooking classes, created local farm stands, hosted more than 200 digital lessons, trained hundreds of teachers, and delivered food weekly to 30 cancer patients and 55 vulnerable families, despite the pandemic and often with no electricity. So, we've gone from this to this, we've gone from this to this. In Hunts Point, I might add, we've gone from this to this, and we're going from this to this, literally. And I like to say, our story is one that is 100% replicable. We're partnering now with the Department of Education. We're looking for people to get on board, so please join me. I've got passion for my plants, and I'm not afraid to show it. So I urge everybody to do something today that you and your future self will thank you for. You should never give up. The past does not equal the future. I'm a lifelong Bronx resident, and I remember when it looked like this. It no longer looks like that, because we have come together. Those are the streets that I walked on as a young man, literally within walking distance to my school. Our school was right in the background there. And today, that is now a memory on my desk. We have taken that and we've turned that literally, it can't show you there. Our life has become literally one maker faire after another, winning award after award after award. And I don't say that to impress you. I say it to impress upon you that in 2021, our humble organization won the National Social Innovation Award. And I come from a place where we have everything to gain and nothing to lose. And now that you know more, I expect you to care more. And once you care more, I expect all of us to do more. So today, I'm here to ask you and urge you, don't waste me. Don't waste us. Don't waste this moment. I'm not here asking for a handout. I'm here asking for a handshake to work together. I'm real excited for you, Abby. And the bottom line is we've grown something remarkable. You can't see it here because the video won't work, but this is the New South Bronx. So My name is Steve Ritz. I'm going to ask you one simple question. What will you do to make EPIC happen and grow something greater? For those who want to reach out, my contact information or website is right there. I'm Steve Ritz from Green Bronx Machine. Thank you so much for your time. God bless you, and let's grow something greater together. Si se puede. Thank you. Woo, I think I broke this. It's a little sticky. Thank you.
For anyone who's curious, there were 444 slides. And
It was supposed to be a seamless flip
And
book.
so-
it was just supposed to be me talking over it, not clicking.
and when he sent it to me, I almost fell out of my chair. And he said, "Don't worry, I promise I can get this. I can get through this in less than 15 minutes."
Did I do
And you
it?
did.
Okay,
You did. Thank you very much. So next, I'm going to call up Donnell Baird with BlocPower. Excellent. I think you have a clicker. There you go. You need that.
All right, go ahead and lower your expectations, everybody.
No, nobody rises to low expectation.
Set the bar high.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Donnell Baird. I run a clean tech company called BlocPower. And what I will do is race through kind of who we are and what we do normally and the kind of business problems we solve for buildings, and then rapidly try to build on what Stephen shared with us around what happened in the Bronx during the pandemic, kind of stay with that theme for these first two conversations. So what we do is we're a tech startup. We make buildings smarter, greener, and healthier for everybody with a focus on low-income buildings. There's 5 million small and medium enterprise buildings. Wall Street would call them, Class B or C buildings. Silicon Valley calls them small, medium enterprise or SME. But they're churches, schools, synagogues, mosques, restaurants, small businesses, apartment buildings, bigger than single-family homes, but smaller than skyscrapers. And so there's millions of these buildings around America, and they're really hard to upgrade and make sustainable. It's going to cost over $100 billion to do that. And so it's hard to do, but it's a real priority for local governments and the federal government. I think yesterday there was $3 billion announced for greening low-income buildings, and there's $200 billion in the climate package that we expect Senator Manchin to agree to. And so fixing these buildings is a priority. And so in our view, relatively quickly, what we want to do is use the latest, greatest breakthroughs in software and hardware out of Silicon Valley to bring innovation to this problem of how do you get lead and mold and asbestos and oil and gas, heating and cooling and hot water systems out of buildings. So you can use machine learning, you can use mobile computing and cloud computing and the Internet of Things to really innovate in this industry. So that's what we do. We build a bunch of software for that, and we work with Goldman Sachs and other partners to borrow money from Wall Street, buy all the electric equipment, and lease it to building owners. We've built out a mapping tool that allows cities across the country to analyze hundreds or thousands of buildings in their community and figure out how they might invest stimulus money or Community Reinvestment Act dollars in greening buildings to make them healthier and safer. And so we built out a software tool to do that. And Jeff Bezos has given us $5 or $6 million to expand that tool nationally. But what I'm really excited to talk about today is workforce. I mean, before that, we do lease clean energy equipment to low-income families so that they're not taking a loan onto their balance sheet. It doesn't increase their indebtedness. And so we create a holding company. We borrow money from Goldman and the state of New York. We buy the equipment, we install it. We own it, we operate it, and lease it to low-income building owners so we don't increase their debt burden. And that allows us to finance many projects and buildings that are quote-unquote subprime. So, what we're really excited about today is the civilian climate corps concept. And so, as we all know as New Yorkers and throughout the region and throughout the country, rates of gun violence have spiked throughout the city and throughout the country throughout the pandemic. And we think that an appropriate response is a civilian climate corps. And so we've been fortunate to partner with the Adams administration to kind of demonstrate this new policy, and we're testing it out. So I want to share a little bit about it with you all today. So the 4 or 5 communities throughout New York City that have the highest rates of gun violence spikes during the pandemic are Brownsville, the poorest census tract in the city, Hunts Point in the South Bronx, which Stephen just talked about, which is part of the poorest congressional district in America, and Jamaica, Queens, and then parts of East and West Harlem. And we've seen huge rates of gun violence over the last few months. What we've done, and frankly, and Stephen was right on it, partially in response to George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and everything that we were seeing, what does it look like to realize that the future of clean energy, the future of public health in New York City actually comes from training and hiring, not just training, but also hiring young people in the South Bronx to take control of their future and lead the economic recovery of this city. And so that's what we think, to kind of build on what Stephen was sharing. So I think some of the students that you teach, when they become 18 or 19, we actually hire some 16-year-olds as well, we train them on how to install solar, how to make buildings all electric, how to remove lead, mold, asbestos from buildings, which is a huge problem across New York City. We can, of course, replace oil boilers or gas fossil fuel boilers with hydroponic or aquaponic systems because we're freeing up a bunch of space in the basement as we convert buildings to all electric. So one way to think about what my company does is we turn buildings into Teslas. Just like Tesla takes the fossil fuel engine out of the automobile and replaces it with an all-electric engine that runs on renewable energy, we can take the fossil fuel equipment out of buildings across New York City and across America and replace them with 100% electric heating and cooling equipment. And that allows us to make our buildings cleaner, greener, healthier, safer, smarter. They're connected to the internet. And we want to hire people who are from vulnerable, high crime, high gun violence communities in New York to lead this workforce, particularly because, as you all know here at the Fed, we have a shortage of skilled construction workers across America, and so there's nobody else to do the work. So here's what we've been learning. This is Rikers Island. We took kids whose parents are in Rikers Island and who have been locked up in Rikers Island, and we trained them on how to install solar panels, and they installed this clean energy project over at Rikers Island, which was transformational for us and them. The energy that's generated from the project, it's a big project, is used to power low-income communities in New York City, I believe in the Bronx or maybe West Harlem. Here we are putting, that's an all-electric system into a church in Queens to move that building off of fossil fuels. Here we're installing a community-owned rooftop internet system. Obviously, something like 20% of New York City families throughout the pandemic did not have affordable, high-quality internet during the pandemic. Huge problem, and so we work with the JPB Foundation and Russ Carson of Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe to, I think they put in like $2 or $3 million of grant money, and we bought rooftop microwave antenna to broadcast a free internet signal across the South Bronx, and I think something like 100,000 people are able to access that signal. But what allowed us to do it was that we had a pool or a cohort of 800 workers that we were able to train and hire to install the internet system. And so we have trained over 1,200 people from these high crime communities so far. And Out of that, we've gotten 800 people certified for OSHA 30, which means they can now participate in construction across New York City and help to increase the supply of well-trained, high qualified construction in New York and kind of lead the recovery. There's 200 full-time, long-term job placements currently. And there's been a 30% reduction in gun violence in the targeted communities. And so the hypothesis of this program was that we were going to work with the White House and Mayor Adams to figure out, could the training and hiring of potentially vulnerable young adults who are at risk of being involved in a future incident of gun violence, sociologically or statistically, and really what that comes down to is gun violence is also an epidemic. Like, if you witness an incident of gun violence, whether you're the victim or the shooter or just a witness, you are far more statistically likely to be involved in a future incident. So the NYPD and the district attorney said, well, look, we got a list of however many thousand people who've been involved in incidents of gun violence. What if we employed and targeted these people? Could we lower the crime rate? And the answer is yes. And so we continue to work with the Adams administration on this project and testing it out. And so to wrap, here's one of our guys. Before I started working at BlocPower, I was freelancing. I think freelancing is a euphemism there. Before I started working at BlocPower in the Civilian Climate Corps, I was freelancing and doing whatever I could do to make $1. And when I heard about this program, I tried them out. You get hands-on training. They give you a chance. They believe in you. And so we think that this must be part of the recipe for how the city recovers. That we continue to lead the world on reducing greenhouse gas emissions by investing in the creation of a workforce that will provide high quality, reliable green construction services to our real estate industry, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving public health, creating jobs and middle class jobs as a way of leading the way back from the pandemic while reducing gun violence. So I'm Donnell. And it's great to be here with all of you today. I look forward to joining on the panel. Thanks.
All right, so far we have talent and workforce development that have become common threads right away. So with that, we have another conversation about this topic with Abby Jo Siegel with Here to Here. Thank you.
Am I on? Is that a yes?
We can hear you.
Hi,
now.
everybody.
Hi, Abby.
The podium, this one? Can I take this one off? Which one's working? Are they both working? Is this one working? Okay. Let me put this one up a little bit. Oh, you can hear me. Okay, good afternoon. It's great to see everybody. I'm glad it's been a long day, but chock full of so much interesting information. As someone who's spent a career in community development, real estate finance, and affordable housing, as well as what I'm doing now, I am just listening to all of the resources that are going into the city and thinking, okay, how do we make sure that goes to jobs, particularly for Bronx students and other low-income students across the city? So I want to take a minute. First of all, I'm on the threshold. I'm leaving Here to Here, and I'm going to the city. So as a result, I am only speaking for myself today, so not representing anybody else. I also want to make sure everybody here spends a minute before I start, maybe half a minute. Think about your first paid job. Just think about what it was, what you learned, and how you got it, and what it meant to you even today, that many years later. Because it's such a critical piece of who we are, what we become, and how we contribute to our communities and to our city. So with that mindset, I'm going to kick it off. Now I have to find this clicker. It's so great to be here in 3D. I feel like I've only done 2D presentations, so I'm like, oh, a clicker, it's not my thing. Okay, so first of all, by the way, Steve and Donnell, I'm so impressed and a little bit bummed I'm going after you, but I also know the folks coming up are awesome. I love this idea of organically grown citizens. Like, that is my job. I'm working on organically grown citizens here in New York, as well as folks who come in, but particularly New Yorkers. So Here to Here was launched in is that the right one? So Here to Here was launched in 2017, really to address the fact that too few students, particularly from the Bronx and other low-income communities, and particularly Black and brown students, were not successfully launching into family-sustaining careers. And that's in a city that has created more wealth than any place probably in the history of time. And it wasn't a transportation issue. Many of them are relatively close, although with exceptions, to Midtown Manhattan by a transportation system that gets in there 20, 40 minutes. We also have been using some proxies for success around graduation rates, both from high school and college, as indicators. But in fact, when you start disaggregating the numbers, they're not good indicators about whether or not folks launch into family-sustaining careers. And that's a problem it's certainly a problem for the young people, their families, but it's a problem for the communities and for our city. We will not be a great city, a thriving city, unless our prosperity is shared. And the way you do that is making sure you tap the talent, particularly the young talent of the city, and making sure that we have systems in place that encourage that really encourage folks like Steve, folks like Donnell, the entrepreneurs, the partners you have in the schools, like Luis at PS 55, to be the entrepreneurs, to really work on their institutions so you can build those gardens in schools. So that's part of the curriculum. So the pandemic definitely hit the Bronx. Here to Here is based in the Bronx. We're on 149th Street. We work with 14 high schools. We work with CUNY. We work with the local businesses. We also work citywide because we know policy is citywide. It's not just about a borough. We also know the regional economy is not just about the city, it's about the region, so businesses everywhere. We know the federal government. We work there. It's got to be thought through in a systematic way. But we were set up very much making sure a young kid growing up in the Bronx, in any neighborhood of the Bronx, but particularly in the low-income neighborhoods of the Bronx, like Hunts Point, have a good shot, a very good shot, a super good shot of landing that family-sustaining career. And so how do you do that, right? I mean, there's a lot of great work going on. We're seeing it every day. There's good projects, there's good initiatives, but how do you make sure that it's not the exceptional kid or the exceptional program or being in the right place at the right time that makes sure you launch into a family-sustaining job? It's got to be because we have a system in place, and we need to build that system in place so that every kid launches into a family-sustaining job, regardless of their zip code, regardless of who their parents are, regardless of the color of their skin. And we know, and we heard it earlier today by Lance Friedman, and I'm super excited about this, we have to look at this through a racial equity lens. So one of the things we do at Here to Here is we have a racial prime, and we look at all of our decisions, our design, our work through that racial equity prime. We also make sure that students are at the table, student voice is at the table, and not just at the table. I mean, people say that and bring them in, have them up, really helping us figure out what the challenges are, what the issues are, and designing the solutions. Because we're not going to get to a system that works unless the people with the lived experience, the practitioners on the ground, the entrepreneurs, not unless they're there helping us figure out the solutions. Because this is not going to get, I say this now, it's not going to get done because I'm at the mayor's office. It's going to get done because all of us agree on what some shared goals are to get this done. And as Steve says, we are doers. We're not just sitting back. We're stepping up, and we're really figuring out how to do this together. So as we talk about systems, I'll just go back a little bit to sort of the question we set out when we set up Here to Here. It's really, what do we need to do differently to make sure young people growing up in the Bronx, particularly the South Bronx, launch into family-sustaining careers? What do we have to do differently as educators and educational institutions? What do we have to do differently as employers? And not just local employers and not just Fortune 100 employers, not just private sector employers, not just public sector employers, but all of us. What do we need to do differently? What do all of us who support young people need to do differently? We talk a lot in the education field, now that I'm in the education field, and workforce development field. We talk a lot about youth development and growth mindsets. Well, we're really talking about adult development and growth mindsets. We all have to change, and it's not because one person has to change or the person over there or the institution over there has to change. We all need to work differently, and we all need to work differently together. So we went around and we listened. We listened to everybody. We listen to the young people, as I said before. We listen to students and their families. We listen to teachers and staff at schools. And we listen to the CBOs. New York is incredibly fortunate about the number of nonprofits and community-based organizations that are doing incredible work, and often on a shoestring. We listen to folks inside New York City who have been doing great work. And we listened to folks, believe this or not, outside of New York City that are doing great work. It does happen. Outside of New York City, in this country and across the globe, to really figure out what best practices so we could start building what we thought is a new model that really brings folks together. And we learned so much, including from so many folks in this room and so many folks who've been in this room today. So one thing we found is our educational system is not really designed to help students connect to their passions and interests, and connecting those passions and interests then to meaningful careers. So what you see in Steve's photos is not necessarily the case in every school in New York. It needs to be. We also have heard a lot from employers, large employers, small employers. This is pre-pandemic, during pandemic, post-pandemic, and even more so today. So many of the graduates don't have the quote-unquote skills necessary to meaningfully contribute to the job on day one. And part of me is like, well, why should they? You should help train them to do that, right? And part of it is we've structured, another thing we learned is we structured our economy really assuming that we have good systems in place to match talent to opportunity. We don't. We don't. We often rely on very informal systems, and very informal systems have been creating greater inequity. And so part of it is we're not going to get rid of those, but we need to think about how to do that more equitably, and then we need to create formal systems that really create the equity. And the result of that is we have so much talent in the city that is just wasted. I'm realizing I'm not using my slides. I'm so bad. Thanks, guys. Just sit there. Told you I'm not used to I'm used to having the other person on the Zoom doing my slides. All right, you want to see my great slide? Okay, back. No, I don't even know what it was. Oh, yes. It's always good to have pictures of people. I'm going to get 440 going, but it will probably take me next 20 years. All right, this is a good slide. Let's spend a few minutes talking about how our current systems aren't working for too many young people. So the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce says that 85% of the jobs today, beginning in 2020, require some sort of post-secondary credential. And typically, it matters if it's an employer-valued post-secondary credential. And if you look at this slide, this is New York State, 100 ninth graders. Only 27 of them will actually get an AA or a BA degree. 27. Those numbers get worse if you talk about low-income communities and Black and brown students. So let's just think about that. If you had, I'll use infrastructure. If you had a pipe, your water pipe to your house, that was leaking by 75%, you would not be talking about, let's put a little duct tape here, let's do a patch. You'd be like, wait, I really need to fix the whole pipe and figure out what's going on. And that's where we are with talent development. It's not because we're not doing some things right, 27, but we're not doing it right enough for enough people, and that to me is a system failure. So again, I said the numbers are worse for students. So we did some research recently, and for New York State-born Black and Latino college-educated students or New Yorkers, New York State-born, 40% are in low-wage occupations. Just let that sink in, 40%. So too many young people, there's too much talent that's not getting tapped. And that's leading to racial and economic disparities that make everyone more vulnerable and our city less resilient and much less productive and a much more challenging place to be and live for multiple reasons. So Edward Deming observed, the system we have is perfectly designed for the outcomes we get. So what does that mean? We need to look at the system. Okay, I'm doing my next slide. Did I get it? No. So again, I just want to reiterate, too often academic and career success depend on family wealth, what zip code you're in, if you're in the right school, the right program, who you know, and a little bit of luck and hope. And we use academics to screen out rather than cultivate and appreciate the diversity of our talent and the different learning styles. And some folks who don't learn well by sitting in rows. I bet everybody here learns well at sitting in rows because oftentimes that's how you got here. That doesn't mean that's what's best for everybody or for our city or for the economy. We also segregate young people out of the workplace. And then we're like, they're not ready for work. Well, if you've never been in the workplace, it's hard to be ready for work. And that's particularly true if you're low income. You're more likely to get an internship, 6 times, I believe is the number, if you're a high-income young person. And we know back to these informal channels of how we know people get internships, let alone paid, and they need paid, and then younger, low-income students often need paid internships. So one thing we should do, and the city's doing it, more paid internships. So everyone here should be supporting universal summer youth employment, particularly if it's school-connected, because that's how you start leveling the playing field. So this approach that we have is failing not only our young people, which is problematic enough and morally enough reason to do something differently, but it's failing our employers, our businesses, big and small. Donnell's, I'm sure, looking for talent left and right as he expands. It fails our communities, and it fails our city. So tapping that talent requires that we really need to rethink and reimagine our talent development system, and particularly our youth talent development system. And it really needs to be not done even in the halls of the Federal Reserve. It's got to be done because we're working together and we're engaging all the practitioners on the ground who are doing this, the entrepreneurs, the young people. We're engaging the employers, the folks in educational institutions, in our public schools, at CUNY, and in our community-based organizations, and young people and the workers themselves. And we need to figure out how do we want to do this and how do we want to do this well? And there's urgency here. We just heard about a ton of money that's coming in, and we know we have a window of opportunity right now, and figuring out how we make sure we leverage that so post-pandemic we're actually coming back better, more equitably, with shared prosperity. The opportunity is ours right now. We need to make that happen. So I've talked a lot about young people, and I just want to underscore this, and this is why I'm excited about my new role. New York City's greatest asset is our population, our diverse, robust population, the talent we have in the city. And we don't tap it. We don't tap it. We just say it's going to work out, and we need to. And too often, our public schools, both our pre-K-12 and CUNY, are not the go-to source of talent for our employers. That's crazy. That's where the talent is. We got to change that. And so if this trend continues, and it's been a long time, it's not like we're not going to change this in a day. So don't give me next week it's going to be finished. But if this trend continues, and we're already seeing the implications, and we heard it on the panel today, and I've heard it in many, many affordable housing conversations, we're going to either have too many of the New Yorkers that we want here leaving this city, which would be a shame because we certainly don't want to become the city that's just wealthy. I mean, David Erickson comes from San Francisco. We know what's happened there in terms of diversity of talent. We also really want to make sure we have an inclusive economy with people and family-sustaining careers, because otherwise we have significant strain on city services and demand for things like affordable housing, and we can't keep up. That's why I'm in this role. I was doing affordable housing, and I'm like, we're not going to build and preserve our way out of this. We got to make sure we're looking at the other side of the equation, which is the income side, and making sure that people have the income so they can live in the neighborhoods they've grown up in. That's why we had the name Here to Here. I missed another slide. It's going to be the... So again, how do we better connect talent in the city to the opportunity? We can do that here in New York. I am convinced of that. And if we do so, we can ensure the local employers have the talent they need, and we have a thriving, inclusive economy. This is exactly where you get to 1 + 1 = 3. We can grow the pie. 3. 11, all right. All right, I'm going to have to amend that slide. All right, so I'm going to do another thing. How many of you have been in a classroom earning a degree in the past? How long ago was it when you last? Was it more than 20 years ago when you were last in a classroom earning a degree? Got to raise my hand. Okay, how about 15 years? Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. 15 years. 10. Wow, we got some degree earners recent. 5. You guys have been earning a degree less than 5. All right, keep your hands up. All right, for those of you who have stopped learning, keep your hand raised. So, where does learning happen? It happens everywhere, anytime, for your entire life, not just in the classroom. It happens in the workplace, it happens at your family dinners, it happens when you're going to church. And we got to value that learning. And so we really need to have a system that braids learning from work into our formal educational pathways and credentials, beginning at least in high school, if not sooner. After seeing Steve's slides, I'm like, all right, pre-K, and throughout your career. And not for some New Yorkers who happen to be in the right job and get it, or happen to go to the right school, but for all New Yorkers, and really have our educational institutions set up to do that. So that means a lot. We have to move from this outdated mode that we have, that you go to school for the first 20 years of your life, or 25 years of your life. And then after that, you work for the next 50 years, and then if you're lucky, you retire. If you're not lucky, you don't. Because that's not what's needed. I don't know that it was ever true, but it is the dominant narrative. But it shouldn't be now, and it shouldn't be now for at least 3 reasons. One, the labor market is changing so fast. I mean, we heard Andrew Kimball earlier, like wind power, who knew, right? And so it requires lifelong learning and constantly reskilling, and we need to make sure we're supporting New Yorkers in doing that. 2, the lived experience of most young people, and particularly low-income young people in the Bronx and elsewhere, they want to work. They benefit from your work, and they often need to work. And so why do we create this tension between work and school? It's got to be work and school, career and learning and earning. And then last, you learn more, right? How many of you remember the test you took in 11th grade? But I assure you, you're at PS 55, you remember how to grow that plant and what that meant. And so we absorb it better. So, braiding learning from work into traditional pathways is really something that we need to think more intelligently about and do. And this is a system that will really benefit the young people, all of us older people, the city, and the community. And it really makes sense if you're in New York City, because we have so many assets. Imagine our city is a classroom. It is a classroom. That's why we're here. That's why people come here from all over the country, all over the world. The good news is that we're seeing this happen, beginning in places. So we're seeing it in instances like Steve putting, he's working on the curriculum. We're seeing it at CUNY, where they're starting to really look at credit for prior learning and credit for concurrent learning, which I like, so everybody use that term, credit for concurrent learning. Because if we can get it into formal degrees, we'll position people for long-term success. We're seeing it in more employers and educators really thinking about apprenticeship, and particularly youth apprenticeship, beginning in high school. And we're seeing it again in school-connected summer youth employment. So again, we're seeing a lot of good examples of initiatives that are starting to braid this. The question is, how do we get it from an initiative, models, pilots, to a system? So I've spent a lot of time thinking about systems work, and I know everybody's about to go to sleep now, so please don't. Because unless we have systems, we're not actually going to get to this thriving, inclusive economy that we want, and it's going to take all of us to get to that system. So one of the things I was really happy about is Bridgespan came out with this report. This is our report. They came out with a report. They looked at about 20 systems organizations and tried to sort of say, what are the superpowers? So we adapted what Bridgespan did, and you can't read this, I'm sorry, so you're going to have to listen really closely. about what it takes to drive systems change. And so what we have, and it's on our report, which sort of looks at here to here's 5 years, and it says these are these 5 things, 5 cylinders. You can't do them in order. You got to do them all at once. You got to do them together. You can't do it as one organization. You have to empower multiple organizations. It's really understand what should be and create the imperative for change and the urgency. And it's develop a shared vision across all stakeholders for what you're working towards and figuring out what do you need to get there. And then remember, you're not starting from scratch. So it's highlighting best practice and demonstrating what's possible and building on what is working. And then you got to always be scanning and recognizing that it's an ecosystem working together. So you have to remain nimble, broker relationships, and fill critical gaps. So you got to be entrepreneurial and innovative. And then you have to mobilize people to advocate for change. And this is change in practice and change in policy. And I often talk about change in policy, capital P, and change in policy, lowercase p, because we see barriers in both. And so the way we've been thinking about doing and moving along doing this takes a page out of the green building movement. So again, my background's in affordable housing and community development. And in the 1990s, you could literally have painted your building green and call it a green building. And no one could have said anything different, because it was green. There was no criteria, no standard. And in the late 90s and early aughts, folks came together. In the commercial space, it was the US Green Building Council. In the affordable housing space, it was Enterprise and Green Communities, a whole bunch of people. And they brought together the practitioners, the people who were doing it, the developers, the financiers, the owners, the operators, the engineers, the architects. They brought them together and said, okay, what's the criteria for green? And they spent time on it and worked on it. I've never seen system change happen so quickly in a complicated field that was resistant to that kind of change. But because they went to the people who were doing it on the ground and determined what it should be, you came up with a criteria that people owned and were mobilized around and were doing. So I have a story. One of our partners in the Bronx, Ford and Bedford, some of you might know them, great organization, they had a building. It was about a 20-unit building. They had solar panels on the roof of that building that they had installed under the Carter administration. They were running those solar panels well into the early 2000s with chewing gum and baling wire. Like literally, the company had been out of business for 15, 20 years. But they knew by keeping those solar panels running, they could keep the affordability to the residents of that building cheaper and better for a longer period of time, so they did it. There were people like Ford and Bedford, organizations like doing green everywhere. So it was like, okay, let's do that. Let's take what they're doing, codify it, have shared ownership, agreement on it, and let's say that's our green building standard. And then we can start putting it into the various RFPs that HPD was doing. And we can say, okay, if you want funding from HPD, here's some bonus criteria. Bonus. You don't have to do it. Bonus criteria. But these folks are smart. It was better for the buildings, made it better, cheaper to run them. They could keep it more affordable, and it had better health benefits. Why would you not do that? And then all the submissions came in meeting the bonus criteria. So that meant, guess what? It became threshold criteria. So pretty soon, you couldn't build affordable housing here in New York City, as well as in many other places in the country, because this was a national initiative, without meeting at least a threshold of green. Similarly, in the commercial space, you had these building owners, and they're still doing it, competing for how green is my building going to be? Is it going to be silver, platinum, or gold? So that moved quickly. So I'm like, all right. I walk into the space. I'm like, okay, how do we make sure we start creating braided pathways? What do we need? We need to codify. And so we developed, working with practitioners, taking a page out of the Green Book, to really develop the key distinguishers for braided pathways. And we worked with a task force over 100 practitioners and experts to start to codify this. And that's what we're trying to do for systems change. So I'll be quick because I'm probably over and I have no idea what time it is. So what we did here is really develop the key distinguishers, and we're building practitioner resources, and then we're mobilizing folks. And frankly, what we're also doing is bringing together the people who are working on this in their school by themselves, or at the CUNY campus by themselves, or at the bank by themselves as an employer, and saying, you're part of this, you're working together. So we're developing a shared language and a shared movement. And so I'll go quickly here. I just want to be clear on what they are and what they're not. They're not like just on high in some research institution about some policy think tank saying you need to do this. They're not meant to sort of reinforce the status quo, and they're not ever done or completed. They're really practitioner developed. They're supposed to be tools and guidelines to help people improve the quality and start to do something new that they might not have been willing to do before. They're an iterative framework. So how many green communities? We're like on 10 green communities 10.0 or whatever. That's what we need in this space, and that's what we're starting to do. And it's a strategy to mobilize folks. So quickly, I won't read through them, but if folks want to learn more, 8 criteria, really, again, a holistic criteria, and it's for what you need to do if you're a school that's really embracing career readiness, work-based learning, a CUNY program or post-secondary program, an employer if you're embracing it, or the actual work-based learning experience itself. And the other thing that it does is employers and educators don't always speak the same language. This creates a term sheet for how you do talent development together, because we need those partnerships. So I'm aware that this won't be easy. It's a lot to do. But when I hear students speak and talk about what an actual work-based learning experience means to them and how it changes their life, I know this is what we need to do and figure out how to do it. And I know it won't be easy, but when we work together to unlock the talent of an entire generation, our community is stronger, our businesses benefit, and all of New York thrives. And that's the New York that I want to live in. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
All right. Now we have Gabriela Ariana Campoverde with Miren. Welcome to the stage.
I'm on the shorter side, so I feel like this might work. Yep, this works perfectly for me. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to meet you. I remember when Abby was going through, like, when was your latest degree? I'm currently working on one. So I'm a dual candidate at Penn, and I'm working on my MBA at the Wharton School and my master's in computer information technology at Penn Engineering. Thank you. But when we're not doing that, I also have a startup company. And at Miren, we're a B2B fintech company. We're empowering financial institutions to lend to small businesses who are credit thin or lack credit history. And I wanted to share a bit more about the journey that I've been on and some insights that I've had over the past year that I've been working on this. Yeah, we're probably wondering, why is it that I even started focusing on lending and enterprise software? They're not the sexiest things out there, for sure. So about a year ago, or let's take it back a bit more. 3 years ago, I was working in financial services. I had a career at American Express, later moved over to Goldman Sachs. I was helping them build software for traders, building products for business travelers, and realized that I wanted, as much as I loved my job, I wanted to work for the working class immigrant communities that I knew so well, growing up in Queens, New York. And so I decided to go back to school and try to join an early stage startup. And in January 2021, this interesting statistic popped out to me. So I learned that when it comes to getting access to a small business loan, Latino entrepreneurs are 60% less likely to be approved for their loan compared to their white counterparts, with all business performance set as equal. And so I put on my former product manager hat, did some user experience research, and decided to go out into my community and learn more about why this statistic is the way that it is. So I don't know if you guys remember last year how harsh that winter was, but in Philadelphia we also received the same exact thing, and that's my neighborhood, about a block away in Rittenhouse Square. And I put on my Uniqlo heat tech gear, my base layers, and decided to go to a 40-minute walk to South Philadelphia, where I knew that there was a strip of Latino small businesses, and literally went door to door to door, figuring out what was the story behind this statistic. And with these conversations with these different small business owners who gave me their time, I learned that there's so much more about what is the way that they're banking? Do they have business credit cards? How did they gain access to startup capital? And just as a reminder, this was post-pandemic. So these were the businesses that were able to survive the pandemic, and this was a large strip of restaurants, so you can only imagine what an impact it had in the restaurant industry. So what was interesting about those conversations is that there was a common theme, and it revolved around credit. Because modern credit is a catch-22. So to get a credit score, you need to have borrowed money. To borrow money, you need to have this credit score. What's interesting about credit scores in the US is that it disproportionately affects minorities. Right now, 12% of white residents do not have it, while 15% of Latinos and 18% of Black residents in the US do not. So I did some time doing some more research, and I posed a question. You guys, you were talking about New York City, we're not talking about South Philly, and I am a diehard New Yorker, so don't worry, I haven't changed my love for New York at all. But I decided to work on this idea, which I found really interesting last summer, and decided not to take an internship. So on several days throughout the hot summer that we had last year, I decided to go to different neighborhoods in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, Morningside Heights, Little Dominican Republic. Didn't even know that was a thing, but apparently in Google Maps, there is a neighborhood called that, which I thought was really awesome. And of course, went to my own neighborhoods in Astoria, Jackson Heights. And again, literally door to door to door, had conversations with these small business owners, and this theme kept popping up. And I figured I really love data. Working with numbers is one of the things that I enjoy about all of my roles. And I took a big look at what this looks like in the US. So it turns out that every year there's 1.2 million small business applications that are turned down. They are rejected for a loan because they are credit thin. So this means that there's not enough of a credit file, or you don't have enough credit history for a lender to be able to identify you as credit worthy, but also it's difficult to determine whether or not you're willing to repay your loan, which is also important in this picture. When we look at the average loan size for a small business or commercial loan in general, it's $663,000, which means that we're looking at an opportunity of close to $800 billion in deployable capital. So really what I've learned throughout these past few months and the past year is that we have a lot of work to do. At Miren, we're helping financial institutions with software and data services solutions to be able to lend to credit thin and no credit small businesses, but we still think that there's room to improve underwriting models, right? When we're looking at community banks and big banks, right now, the way that they're underwriting small businesses is through algorithms. Those algorithms are still focusing on credit scores. And if credit scores don't tell the full picture, how can we empower them with the right tools to be able to better identify credit-worthy businesses? We also need to enable lenders to deploy their capital. Through this journey, I've learned that there's community development financial institutions and credit unions which are willing to work with first-time borrowers. The tragedy here is that these smaller lenders can't afford what the big banks or the multi-branch community banks can afford. That means that the software, their CRM tools, even their websites are not built with the great user experience that you would have at a Chase or a Wells Fargo or a Bank of America. But what that also means is that even during the pandemic, they weren't able to have the impact that they could potentially have had or been more efficient given the smaller teams that they had. And that's where my company is enabling small business lenders to do more and really drive value with their time. A third stream of opportunity is creating more investment instruments. Beforehand, when I was in New York and prior to COVID, I would love spending my free time in New York City meetups where I got to know what was the latest in fintech, mostly from the people who were actually just at the nascent state of an idea and trying to build something from 0 to 1. Since then, there's been companies like Titan or Sweater who are working on democratizing financial products to non-accredited investors. But I think there's also room for opportunity for us to be able to look at how can we invest further in local economies through new financial products and have retail investors be able to fuel this. But if there's one thing that I leave you guys with, it's the idea of why is it that these small businesses are important? I know that probably time and again, it's been battered into us that small businesses are the backbone of the economy. And yes, they are. But I think what a lot of us oftentimes forget is that they are the folks who are willing to employ someone in their neighborhood that potentially could not get a job. For a small business, it's not just the small business owner itself, but it's also the family that is able to benefit from the ability to have income mobility. And lastly, when we see small businesses thrive, we also see local economies thrive. Thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely to meet you all, and thank you so much for having me. Here's my contact info if you're interested in connecting.
All right, so next we have Dr. Lorna Thorpe with NYU. I think it's actually a perfect segue into talking about the city dashboard and the credit security work that you've been doing, so thank you. Perfect.
It's a real honor to be at this event and particularly to be on this panel. And I'm wearing this hat just for a moment to say what I'm talking about today, the solutions really are what we just heard. We heard from BlocPower, Green Bronx Machine, here to here. And Gabriela, I have some data for you. So I'm going to take this off, but I just want to say these are all very closely intertwined. Let's see if I can figure out how to move the slides. I'm a professor of epidemiology, and part of what I do is study the social and neighborhood drivers of health. I work with a group called the City Health Dashboard, and we recently partnered with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to get closer to the problem of tracking health and poverty in neighborhoods in cities, and I want to tell you about that project. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about the City Health Dashboard. It's a free online platform with a goal of helping cities get closer and leverage the power of data, we just heard about that from Gabriela, to improve the health and well-being of everybody in their communities. So it's a very large free online data platform, and it focuses on providing data on more than 40 measures of health, of drivers of health, those neighborhood drivers of health that I just talked about, and drivers of health equity for more than 750 cities in the United States. And what's unique about it is when you go to look for data, and I imagine you experience this, Gabriella, you often find data at the state level, or you'll find it at the county level. You almost never find data that's parsed to city boundaries, reflecting the experiences of city residents. And so what our geographers on our team and our analysts on our team, and I'm joined here today by Dr. Lee, who is really instrumental on this project, what we do is we parse it to the city boundary, and we make it available, and we design the dashboard in partnership with our users. And so we work with mayors and city managers, local city agencies, community organizations, health advocates, education advocates, policy advocates, and they helped us design the City Health Dashboard. And so they are really the primary users. They are the ones who help us decide what measures are actionable and which ones are not. And so what we've done is we've parsed data into groups of information: health outcomes, social and economic factors, health behaviors, measures of clinical care, of the physical environment. And you have all of these data available at the city level. But if it's in yellow here, it's also available at the neighborhood level. And if it's available at the neighborhood level, then people can really look at what's happening in neighborhoods and associate the health with the drivers of health and take action. I'm going to talk about the take action in a moment. What we did with the Fed New York team was develop a neighborhood measure of credit security, insecurity, and to really focus and develop one metric that can identify the community's credit insecurity. I want to talk about what that measure is. This is a measure that was developed by economists here at the Fed. They partnered with Equifax, and they released a report back in 2019 that focused on describing at the state level and at the county level for the entire country which communities have limited access to credit. We just heard about that from Gabriella's presentation. So essentially, in this map here, you see states that have very poor credit in red and very good credit in light green and dark green. And what that means is if it's light green and dark green, a high proportion of the community has access to credit, has revolving credit, can borrow when they need to, can absorb shocks when they suddenly have sudden costs that they incur. But if you have poor access to credit, that means you're not in the credit economy, you are not connected to banks and credit unions, or you are connected but your access is poor. So you don't have the revolving credit, you don't have the ability to absorb the shocks at the individual level. And in a community, when that credit insecurity score is high, it means the community doesn't have the ability to absorb that. We realized how important this was in the pandemic. And so we worked together to really focus on this neighborhood measure of credit insecurity. Why did we want to put it on the dashboard? This is a schematic that basically says more and more evidence is teaching us that many different aspects of someone's financial well-being has a direct relationship to someone's health. So not only your income, but also your access to credit, also the wage levels in your community, also income inequality in your community, and all these different measures have a direct influence on health through a number of different pathways. And credit access has been linked to higher risk for chronic disease at the individual level, higher risk for depression, increased use of alcohol and tobacco, and just generally self-rated health. So we worked together to develop a Census Tract level measure of credit insecurity. So we know that the pandemic acutely hit some neighborhoods very hard, other neighborhoods not so hard. And so what you can see on the dashboard for people who are familiar with data and people who are not familiar with data, the measure is basically measuring the percent of residents with limited access to credit. It's a score from 0 to 100. The higher the value goes, the worse the community is, the more credit insecure it is. And so on the top here on the right, what you're seeing is a sort of a scale from nearly 0 to 92. 92 is the census tract with the highest credit insecurity rate of the 760 cities that I mentioned are on the dashboard. The average credit insecurity index for all cities is 20. New York City is a little worse. We're at 24. If you look at San Jose, California, it's a little bit better. It's at 14. And if you look at Detroit, Michigan, the gold bars, it's higher. It's much worse. It's 49 in Detroit. Here is a map of New York City, and on the dashboard you can download the data, or you can look at the maps like this, and you see the credit insecurity score for every neighborhood. You see the highest, the best, most credit secure neighborhood is in Forest Park, Queens. The most insecure neighborhood in New York City, according to 2020 data, was in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And this credit insecurity tracks directly with measures of poor mental health. So as a neighborhood's credit insecurity index gets worse and gets higher, the proportion of people who report frequent mental distress gets higher as well. So we have released these data literally this week. They're available for 766 cities. Along with the data, we have a whole part of the City Health Dashboard is a Take Action tab, where we identify what are the policies and programs, like what we heard here today, that can really improve a neighborhood's credit insecurity. What are the policies? Who are the partners you could work with? What are the strategies? How do you find funding to achieve, to implement those strategies? How do you measure success? If you're a researcher, or you're like Gabriella, you might want to download the data for all 766 cities and go to town. You can do that directly with APIs. I will say we are releasing a lot of new information all the time, including on air quality, on housing, on education measures that usually aren't available at the city level. So if you are interested in data, stay in touch, sign up for our newsletter, or follow us on social media. And I just want to say again, what a pleasure to be on this panel today. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about Enterprise's work today. I do want to echo this panel has been amazing. I was taking notes. I learned so much. So happy to be here to talk about Enterprise's work and how we interface and how we are thinking about the city's recovery. So I'm Baba Helm. I am the Vice President and the Market Leader for Enterprise Community Partners, and I'm representing the New York Office of Enterprise Community Partners. Enterprise is a national nonprofit that exists to make a good home possible for the millions of families without one. We work in all 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and have 11 market offices across the country. So in 2020, Enterprise launched its new strategic plan, focusing on 3 core goals, right? All looking towards addressing the massive shortage of affordable housing across the country. Our first pillar is increasing the housing supply. We look to invest in the preservation and the creation of affordable homes that people can afford. Advancing racial equity, looking at dismantling this enduring legacy of systematic racism in policy, practice, and investments, and building resiliency and upward mobility, looking at how climate risk and hazards impact communities and how communities are able to prepare, stabilizing those communities and allowing for upward mobility and resiliency. So New York is really at a great inflection point. In the city's history, you know, the crisis of affordable housing has probably never been as acute as it is now. And we're also facing the increasing threat of climate risk. And those two things together, the limited affordable housing stock and the threats that climate risk means, is Enterprise has honed in on how and what role we can play to address those two challenges. Because climate risk threatens the limited supply of affordable housing that this city already has. And what that means is it's imperative that we all are paying attention to those risks, thinking about what resources are needed to mitigate against those challenges, and supporting households that need more and more affordable housing across the full gamut. So if you think about it, what does the data show us? You know, I've been, followed before me is the data technicians from NYU and Miren, and even BlocPower talked about some of the data, and what does the data show us about what the need is here in New York? So New York has just 37 affordable homes for every 100 low-income renters, just 37. 1 in 8 households is housing insecure. They pay more than 30%, and in some cases, more than 50% of their income towards rent. The city's homelessness crisis is at its worst point since the Great Depression. On any given night, there are over 78,000 individuals residing in a New York City homeless shelter. And this reflects our legacy of historic racism and continuing structural racism, with Black and Latinx New Yorkers making up over 90% of shelter residents. And too many households live in neighborhoods with unhealthy and poor housing conditions, especially in low-income neighborhoods. I'm really interested at the data that you just showed about the health of communities and that index and how it overlays and what we know about neighborhoods with low housing quality conditions and neighborhoods most prone for climate risk and those kind of related events. But so code issues are improving in some measures, but a large part of our housing stock also suffers from exposure to mold and vermin and lead and fires, right? And we know just a couple of months ago, there were these horrific, terrible fires just in the Bronx in a number of affordable housing developments. And we know that extreme weather is also a growing threat. I just got on my phone, the beeps, maybe you did too, right, that the city is expecting damaging winds tonight, maybe the possibility of a tornado, and who would have thought possibly hail in March. But those are all parts of what we're seeing related to the climate risk that we all face, and what that means for affordable housing is an area of concern for us. Low-income families are facing I'm getting used to the clicker too. They're facing the first and the worst burdens of climate change for 2 reasons. They're more likely to live in communities prone to natural disasters, and they have the fewest resources to prepare and recover from climate events. They also face the highest energy burdens, meaning they can't afford to pay more when the transition to renewable energy makes the energy bills more expensive. And it was great to hear BlocPower talk about their model and how they support the property owner to cover the cost of making some of those changes to their homes. But of concern is if a property owner can't afford it, and if there are no incentives or loans or other forgivable programs, those costs may ultimately pass down to the tenants. And when we're talking about low-income tenants who are already stretched thin, that's an area of concern, something that we all have to think about as we push and push for more energy efficiency and what that means for the property owner and ultimately what that can mean for the tenant. So given all of these risks, what do we do at Enterprise? We double down on our climate risk reduction work after Superstorm Sandy. We looked at and we recognized that Sandy really devastated the affordable housing and the public housing stock. NYCHA alone, which is home to over 400,000 New Yorkers, was hugely impacted by Sandy. 10% of NYCHA's portfolio was severely damaged as a result of that storm. 10%. And more recently, you can see from the photo, Hurricane Ida last year impacted hundreds of housing units across the city in non-flood-prone communities. and it caused the death of 18 people living in basement apartments that were unprepared for flooding. What will the next storm be? COVID has brought together multiple issues: the importance of a safe and affordable home, and the very real risk of natural hazards and something unexpected like a pandemic, and being able to maintain resiliency throughout. During the last 24 months, we were all very, very, very centered on the home. You know, your home became your office, it became your school, it became your health care center. In response to COVID, we launched a couple of very innovative programs that were meeting the moment at the time. We launched the Emergency Action Partner Program and Resident Stability Program, and it provided much-needed grants and capacity to support to nonprofits on the front line of the COVID relief efforts. And together with partners, we launched Project Parachute, a coalition of property owners, nonprofits, and city agencies committed to helping vulnerable and underserved New Yorkers stay in their home even as the pandemic continues. And we all wish COVID was over, but it is still continuing, and people and livelihoods are still at risk. Through our coalitions program, we're still providing holistic support to city residents, including rental assistance and connections to critical recovery services. To date, we've supported nearly 3,000 individuals with rental assistance and provided over $6.2 million in financial assistance and connections to critical recovery services. But our housing still needs protection and advocacy, which is heightened now that the state's eviction ban has been lifted. At the same time, we're also looking and addressing climate risk as well. Because if our housing units get destroyed by climate risk, we lose ground. And the city has a lot of ground to make up, so we can't afford to continue to lose ground. The impact of climate change is not equally felt. Climate change has a disproportionate impact on people of color. Through Enterprise's Equitable Path Forward program, we're actively working to build racial equity by providing capital and other resources to BIPOC-led affordable housing developers. We've created Enterprise Green Community Standards, and Abby talked about that process and how we brought all these stakeholders together to really figure out what was the best approach, how could we really address energy efficiency, health, and resiliencies, and these standards are now required in New York City. And we've developed a robust climate reduction program to help affordable housing owners prepare, build to, and recover from climate risk. We've also launched programs to finance repairs while we wait for the federal government to mobilize its resources. But there's so much more we can do, we need to do together. Building climate resilient and affordable housing in New York should be the norm, not the exception. We need grants, patient capital, low-cost financial incentives to address policies that promote habitability and plan for the future. We need public and private partners to look at all of the work that's happening on the ground and help us replicate the best solutions for New York. When we build more resilient communities, we build a better future for everyone. Thank you.
We're a little low on time. I'm wondering, David, what you would like to suggest. All right, we're going to go for it. So, like one rapid fire sort of round. I'll invite you back up here. And I think I'm going to forget about the questions that I prepared, but I have a good one that I think should be interesting. All right. Well, wow. So there was so much, thank you, first of all. There was so much passion in all of these presentations. And I think that Gabriella touched a bit on this, but I'd love to hear, before getting into technical things or policy, the big picture stuff, I think given the limited time, maybe let's go with the personal question of what inspired these missions that you set out to advance. I think Gabriella talked about her experience growing up in Queens and how that shaped her experience and her interest in solving this problem within her community, but also within others. And I'd love to hear from the other panelists as to what inspired you to make this change. So I will start with Baba.
Can you hear me? Thank you. So Enterprise has the unique perch of having such deep connections to community providers, right? Those affordable housing providers that are interfacing with residents day in and day out. And through them, we've understand what the needs are on the ground. And that is what's defined our strategic approach, that we need to be able to increase the housing supply just because our city is growing, and we want a great city, growing city. I mean, I think Abby talked about the value of the city's diversity is its population. And our residents are important in terms of how we steward them and how we meet their needs. And so that's really what's informed our work and our strategic priorities.
Thank you. And how about you, Stephen? What experiences living in New York or elsewhere has shaped what you're doing at Green Bronx Machine?
Well, there are a couple of things. So, first of all, it's rooted in a fundamental belief that children, people, we shouldn't have to leave our communities to live, learn, and earn in a better one. That, we need to take ownership of where we are. I shouldn't have to go somewhere else for a better life. So there's that piece. Then let's talk about the data. And I'll talk about it as it relates to education. All the data points to the single fact that children who have access to one kind, caring adult in life will succeed. And that's within, I will never go broke giving love, but I will certainly get a tenfold multiplier effect on that. What drove me to do this work is, I'll be honest, I've been asked to graduate and work elsewhere. Takes a certain amount of fortitude to wear this hat and a bow tie. But I'm an insurgent. I'm an insurgent who has been non-profited to death in my community. I've seen so many organizations really get fat off the dysfunction of what has been going on. And then we talk about some systems. Well, let's talk about the food system, because the food system isn't broke. It's really doing what it's designed to do, which is extract as much from as many as possible and concentrate in the pans of a few. And then I look at the realities of my community. People are dying from food. We are fat, diseased, and diseased. And on top of that, we have children who are just really hungry. The most important school supply in the world is food. We can't expect kids to thrive if we're feeding them poison. So for me, it's looking at where I live and wanting to make a difference and make sure my reach forever exceeds my grasp. And that starts with being disruptive. It starts with holding myself accountable. It starts with holding others accountable. And, the work started by mistake. I was tasked, with a group of kids that nobody wanted, myself included. I didn't ask for it, and there I was. But, take kids who have come out of jail, often with children, first and second grade, and keep them out of jail to this day, is really what this work should be about for all the benefit of New York City. So, I get a lot of reinforcement. I get a whole lot of love daily. So that's also what helps, but I'm here, let me be clear, I need some help. I'm not, I've gone from 1 to 10 and 10 to 100, and, I'm up against well-moneyed kind of status quo, perpetuators. And, I need help doing this. We do the work that we do, on a $500,000 a year budget. I'm a full-time volunteer, and I'm not here asking for money, I'm asking for support. Right. How do you scale this? Who are the people? We do have the attention of the mayor, and I'm thrilled and honored. He's been a big supporter. It takes time, and I'm up against some big people who don't want to see things change dramatically, just enough to take credit for it and keep the money flowing to them. But really, let's empower us. I believe we are the ones we're waiting for. My kids are the ones, look, I'm preaching to the choir here.
How about you, Abby? Making the pivot from housing and then into talent and workforce development, what inspired that pivot?
Well, it isn't one thing, but I'll try to. I just think, I'm spending a lot of time working on trying to build and preserve more and make sure there's more affordable housing, and just saying, well, what about the other side of the equation? We've known for 40 years the labor market changed. We've known that incomes have remained flat for low-income folks. We've known that. There's been speeches here at the Federal Reserve about that, and my question was like, what are we doing differently if we know that, and particularly in this city? And so having worked at Enterprise and worked in every borough and every corner of the neighborhood, and particularly working a lot in the Bronx, and knowing how many assets we have. So we have financial assets like no other place in the world. We know that. But we have talent assets like no other place in the world. That's the myth of the city. And so my question is like, why are we not paying attention? Why are we not really connecting the dots here? We are a city of curious minds, of doers, of dot connectors, of networkers. Why are we not having, empowering Steve and his young people to lead our future? Because they're going to, and it's going to be better if we do it together and invest in them. So that's how I got to this.
That's wonderful. You talked about, you mentioned applied learning, and I thought of this nonprofit also in New York called Hudson River Sailing School, and how they use sailing as a vehicle to teach students who are struggling with math and science. So they're learning physics, aerodynamics, and to think like as somebody who was never really good at math or science, how great that would have been to have had that environment, and how cool that could be to have a menu of these types of applied learning opportunities within schools throughout the city. And because a lot of these models do exist, and so there needs to be some cohesion, and also, of course, support and resources. So.
And address the barriers that are preventing more schools to be like that school, or be like the Harbor School, or be exceptional like the school that Steve works in.
Absolutely. How about you, Lorna?
Well, I suppose I can talk personally about what really draws me to the dashboard. And I, one of the things I did when I finished training as an epidemiologist was work for the Centers for Disease Control as an epidemic intelligence officer, and they would send us out to different parts of the country responding to epidemics, or different parts of the world. And in some parts of our country, we have health departments, state and local health departments, that just really didn't have the resources or the data that they needed to respond. Whereas going to India and responding to tuberculosis outbreaks, they were working on, with pen and paper, but they had data, and they could actually use it, and they were really smart. So I then began working at the New York City Health Department after that stint as what we call Epidemic Intelligence Service officer. And the New York City Health Department I was there at a time when the data focus was really strong, and we did a lot to reduce chronic disease risk by taking smoking out of the restaurants and bars, and really thinking about the food systems in the schools, and thinking about how to improve the health of New Yorkers. And so when colleagues at NYU began to dream about this city health dashboard, I was really captivated, and it was just a real pleasure to join and work on neighborhood data, city level data, and be a real champion for small and mid-sized cities around the country.
Yeah, it's really remarkable what you've created, and also just the opportunities to still build upon this framework. And I think my mind was going about different green buildings and housing environments and mold and indoor air quality and all of these other things you can input. I'll shift the question, and then we'll wrap up, just given the short time. We have at the end two startup founders, and I think just thinking about the ecosystem that allows startups to thrive and to grow. I'd love to hear about your experience as a New York founder, and if you felt that you had the necessary or sufficient infrastructure, support, and resources. Like, did you find that in the city? And if not, what was missing that could have helped you get off the ground? I'll start with you, Gabriella.
Oh, keep testing.
Just keep talking.
Oh, okay. So, well, it's a little different for me because I'm currently in South Philly, and that's where Philadelphia, and that's where I started working on this idea. But I think what was interesting about New York, when I first started even considering becoming either a joiner of a startup or a founder, was the community that you have in either like the meetups or the startup scenes or different entrepreneurship circles that you can find across the city. So I never even heard of startups growing up. It just wasn't a thing. I was also the first in my family to go to college. So like the programs that you were mentioning, that's what I used as a resource to get to like my education and also get to where I am today. So super thankful for folks like you who are willing to invest in, people like me. We need more of those out there. But I think with New York, there's also just like the energy and like the vibrancy and folks who are in the startup scene. You're always willing to make an introduction to someone. And when I was part of that community, I'm super excited to rejoin that community now that I'll be moving back to New York in like the summer. It was the ability to be able to network with folks, to exchange ideas, to provide constructive feedback. And also I think with the founder community, regardless of where you are, it's like you share the same struggles. It's not an easy path. And when you find other people, you're always willing to go the extra mile for them because you understand how difficult this journey could be.
How about you, Donnell, as an entrepreneur born and raised in New York? How has the city provided for the right resources to you for your business?
Yeah, I think the thing that's most exciting for us, when we raised venture capital, they said, well, hey, can you guys move your company out to San Francisco? And we declined, right? We knew as New Yorkers that we were going to have an incredibly intelligent, hyper diverse, immigrant or descendant of immigrant workforce to depend on that could go global in an instant, that could navigate building a company together. So that was one part. I think the local government and state government, I think in New York, have been for us really invaluable partners. We won a contract from the city of New York. I don't know of too many city governments that would award, a multi-million-dollar contract to a startup, right? It's like risky for a government to do that kind of thing. But the city of New York has done that, right? The state of New York has done that. And so they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is when they talk about innovation. I just think that we have an opportunity to kind of lead, certainly America, in terms of women in technology, right? I just think it's not close when you look at New York City versus like San Francisco or Miami. We are really out front when it comes to participation of women in technology, and want to see that continue to expand to all communities of color and diverse communities across the city. And we know it will.
Thank you. I feel David's presence over me. So I'll before handing it over to David, I just want to read one of my favorite Jane Jacobs quotes. And it's this one that goes, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. And I love that quote so much, and I feel like it really sort of speaks to the essence of community development and what we tried to do by bringing together people who might not otherwise meet each other, who together could really scale impact through our city and also create models that can be scaled around the globe. So thank you very much for being here and presenting, and also for joining this like rapid fire discussion, which could be much longer. But and I know, Abby, you have a flight to catch, so we won't go too much longer. So David, I will kick it to you.
You can't improve on that summation of the whole day. It's just pretty clear to me that we have the ideas, we have the partners, and we have the resources to really make a big difference and really make an economy that works for all segments of society. I want to thank this panel. I want to thank Dominic for organizing it. I want to thank those of you in the audience who stuck with us. We had 100 people still online as at last count, so that was, and many hundreds more during the course of the day. So I want to thank you all online as well. Thank you to the staff that helped us put this on, and we'll keep you posted, because this is not the end of this conversation. Thanks to everybody.